Welcome back to this episode of Paint Society. In this episode, we're going to go over 2K Urethane Surfacer Primers. We're going to talk about when to use them, how to even mix them, and how to apply them to whatever project that you are working on here on Paint Society. And thanks for joining me on this episode. Now, the most important part of any spray job, paint job, whatever it might be, is going to be the initial primer coat. If you don't get the primer right, nice and flat, or even sprayed well, you can't expect to get a nice finish in the end. A lot of people really don't understand the concept of spraying down a nice, smooth primer finish and sanding it, but that's okay because in this video, we're gonna go over how to primer this hood, and how to sand down and feather down a surface that's a little bit rough and primered as well. And this is the product that we're going to be using today in this video. This is an Eastwood product, and there's many other different products that you can use that are very similar and budget friendly as well. Now what we have here is a 2K Urethane Primer Surfacer. That means it's going to have a nice build. Now there's a few different primers on the market, polyester primer being the most thickest type of primer, but when it comes to primering, this is the typical primer that you're going to use to fix anything on your vehicle. Now we have epoxy primers, etching primers, and different primers, but basically what we really want to talk to today in this video is about urethane primers, the most common primers on the market that you're going to be using for your project. Now, these primers will sometimes come with a reducer, and they will sometimes come with an activator as well. This particular one only comes with an activator. Now, sometimes they'll be called hardeners. They can be called different additives, but when you go to purchase your product, make sure you get the primer and the hardener activator, whatever it might be, because if you just use this alone and never mix in this, guess what? It's never going to dry. And just to show you the quick difference of the two different types of primers mainly on the market, well, we're gonna look at this one. This is an epoxy primer, and an epoxy primer is a much heavier duty primer, but doesn't really get sanded. This is gonna be for more of your restoration. This is gonna go directly onto bare metal. Usually, typically, before you do the body work, you want to put your epoxy primer down so you don't have any type of rusting. Now, epoxy primer, like I said, it really takes a long time to dry, and it doesn't really get sanded too much. You'll go ahead and you can scuff it down with maybe like a 320 and put your filler over it, or go right into sealer, depending if your project doesn't need any type of filler on top. But this is mainly for your bare metal projects. Today, we're not working on a bare metal project, so we're going to be using our 2K Urethane Surfacer Primer. And of course, if you've been following the channel for a while and you don't have access to a spray gun, or your project's just a little bit smaller, this does come in the spray can as well. This is a 2K aerosol spray can. And of course, the same thing for the urethane primer. It comes in a spray can. The only main difference is, guys, is you're not going to have the same amount of build out of a spray can as you will out of the actual spray gun. And you might even remember that we did do this whole entire hood in the urethane primer, and we sanded that back down. We even added some filler. So today we're going to put a nice final coat of the urethane primer onto this hood using our spray gun. And now we're going to go ahead and direct our attention to this fender that could use a little bit of sanding and smoothing out before the primer coat. I'm going to be using this 3M extract system that I picked up off of Amazon, and it helps to really keep the garage and environment clean, since this is where I'll be preparing the actual vehicle itself. I also coupled it with a 3M sander. It is a little bit pricey when I bought it, but it really does do a good job. And once again, the vacuum system is a big deal in the home garage. And the paper that we're going to be using is a Kovacs 320, and I'm running a interface pad. That is kind of like a soft spongy pad, and that's going to help with the contours of the fender. You can see how we've lined up already our holes so that when we go ahead and put it onto the actual vacuum sander itself, we can suck out all that dust right into the filtration system, and it's not in our garage making a big mess. It also helps with the sanding process because it doesn't clog up as easily. And I find that 320 is the highest you want to go before you primer it, because you don't want to lose adhesion, and also you don't want it to be too rough. So I would tinker in between 220 and 320 for primer, but I don't think I would want to go any lower, because sometimes those sand scratches, well, the primer can shrink into them over time, and you'd find later on little marks all in your primer, and then eventually your paint if you don't address it. So we're going to start with this area first. Now I'll be the first to tell you that you don't need this fancy pants sander. All you need to do really is get some 320 and some water, and that's really going to help smooth this out, and you can do this totally by hand. I happen to really like cool products and keeping the garage clean, so this is why I went and bought this actual unit, but you don't need to spend this type of money just to do something simple just like this. See how nice and smooth that is? This is actually basically the primer from the factory, and we can just go ahead and further scuff up the rest of the panel. We just want to feather out the areas where the primer did go ahead and peel off. Now in some areas like here, it is just a little bit rough, but the primer will go ahead and smooth and fill out that whole entire area. So we're not gonna have to worry about putting body filler into that. Let's continue along the way. So we have our top surface all prepped. Now, if you guys are wondering if you're in the body shop or if you want to just go ahead and get one of these cool stands, this is the flexible tool stands. I loved it so much, I ended up picking up another one. It just makes life easier. Of course, you could do this stuff on tables or whatever type of stand you want, but having the proper stand just makes the job that much more efficient. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dial in this area right here, and then we'll go ahead and scuff the rest of the fender. Once it's all sanded down, we're going to use some of this pre-painting prep, and once I pretty much clean it off with this, then we are good to go. Now you can use spray weight glass cleaner, you can use some Dawn original dish soap to do the same exact thing, or some mild degreaser, and that will clean it up. But this comes in a can, and it's much easier to apply and wipe down, and pretty much at this point it is going to be good for its primer coat, just like that. Now, some of you might ask, Brian, how come you didn't block it out? Well, this is pretty much a brand new part. It was covered with a wrap at one point. It doesn't have any dents or anything like that. So you don't need to use your block. Sometimes your block can get you into trouble if you're not using it properly, believe it or not. So just a scuff here and a good primer coat and a sanding, and then this thing will be ready for paint just like that. And that's the beauty of a part that doesn't need any type of body filler. Now that our fender's all ready for primer, we'll turn our attention right back to the hood. Now, it's been a little bit since we've actually worked on it, so I want to make sure that I have a nice consistent 320 grit scratch. Like I said before, we have some body work areas, some areas where the paint originally was, some burn through. So we want a nice consistent primer urethane surfacer on here, so let's give it a nice consistent finish first. And after that 320, we'll again use our pre-painting prep, a nice little cleaner to get it all ready for primer. Now, you want to really try your best to wear gloves as much as possible before any type of painting. Basically, you should be wearing it all the way through, but I know how it gets sometimes. You just don't have them, or you're taking them off. Your hands are too wet to get them back into. And I'm going to tell you, if you're wearing gloves, it's definitely going to help keep the oils off the panel. There's so many areas where fish eyes can come from, and we really want to try our best to eliminate such type of contamination, because it is very, very, very frustrating. So we got this a good cleaning here, and let's talk about mixing up that primer now and getting into the application process. We're ready to mix our primer. So this mixes up 4-to-1, so let's not make this complicated. This is a mixing cup. Now this is going to be reversed because you look at it from the inside while you're pouring. But let me just show you. First you want to locate 4-to-1, and we're going to read it a little bit backwards, okay? So 4 is going to be your product. The first number is going to be your product. Now we have different selections of how much product we can actually use. I want to use the max amount of product. So take a moment, and which one do you think will be the max amount of product in this column? Correct, number 5, okay? If you just need a little bit of primer, let's say we're just doing the fender only, maybe we would use 2. Since we want to use the max amount, the product is going to go right here to that number 5, okay? Then the next component, which is going to be the activator, the 1 part, is going to go into the next column of numbers to the matching number that you use initially. So that's going to go to number 5 right here. Now, what do we do with this column? Well, we ignore it because it's only 4-to-1 mixing ratio. And how do you find that? Well, most products nowadays will say it right there. If it had said 4-to-1-to-1, then that would mean there would be another type of activator, reducer, hardener, or something else that the product would call for, and you would mix that up to the final 5 in that column. Now, depending on your primer, they all mix up a little bit differently, so you cannot just go mix up primer 4-to-1-to-1. You have to locate the actual mixing ratio on your particular product itself. Now to make things a little bit easier, I went ahead and I got this Dito's mixing top container. Now you can probably get this on eBay or even go into an auto body store and you can probably get one. It just makes life easier for pouring. Also, what you can do is you can take this little top off and attach a drill so that you can stir it easily. Inside it has a spindle and it will stir it. Now I pre-mixed this one already on the mixing machine at the shop, so I know that it is good to go. Now we're going to show you the actual mixing ratio now that we just marked off. So we're going to mix it up to that first number 5. Now we're using a gray primer, and it also comes in black. That's usually available in most brands, but this is going to be getting a color change, this whole vehicle. And well, the color is going to require a lighter undertone at first. So we're going to get this whole thing primed up in gray first. Now you can see how we went right to that number 5. And now next up, we're going to go to the next number 5. We have it marked there with a Sharpie. And that's all we have to do. Now we're using the 3M PPS system. This makes life a lot easier. Otherwise, you're going to have to clean out your whole entire paint gun cup and all that every single time. So basically what we need to do now is put the top on. And to do that, you first want to line up this tab with the inside of these little lines right here. Okay, you want to go ahead and push it down and snap it and then turn it. Okay, if you want to double check to make sure that you have a nice seal, go ahead and lift it up a little bit. The cup should lift up, okay? So go ahead and put it back down, turn it, and it's good to go. Now the cool thing is it does come with this little top, so we can go ahead and shake up our 2 components. Now at this point, once we've shaken it up, you want to work pretty quick. You don't have to get it on right away, but usually within about maybe 30 minutes, if you're letting it sit here just by itself, it will start to kick, and it's going to spray the best once it's just mixed because it's not going to start to thicken up any. So let's talk real quick about the spray gun. Now the spray gun that we're going to be using for primer, and what I've been using a lot, is a 3M Performance gun. And the reason why I like it is because you can change out the fluid tips pretty easily. So you can just take it off and clean out this portion and pretty much wipe the tip off with a paper towel, and this spray gun is completely clean. It makes life a lot easier. Now you can change the fluid tip. This is a 1.8, and I find a 1.8 for primer just puts the primer on the way it should be, nice and thick, and it doesn't struggle to put it on. A lot of people do message me and say, well, I have a lot of issues with the primer, it's not going on nice and wet, and usually it's because the fluid tip you're using is not big enough to spray that actual primer itself. You can see this is a 1.8, and that is the size of the little hole right there in order to spray out the primer properly. And then we'll take the cup, and since the paint gun and the cup are completely compatible, we'll just put the cup and the paint gun together. And here we have our primer that is ready to be sprayed. We're going to be spraying around 20 psi, so I'll go ahead and find that pressure. Now this is the pressure that the 3M Performance gun recommends for spraying all of its coatings. Now we're going to be applying a total of 2 coats to the whole entire panel, but 1 more to the troubled areas. And what do I mean by troubled? Well, I mean the areas where it's been sanded down to the panel. And guess what, guys? I had to put just a little bit of filler down in here because it looks like it got a little bit melted at one point. So we'll go ahead and apply our primer to those areas first, and then we'll move on to the hood and apply it to the body filler there. Now, as you can see, this primer is not looking too good. It's too thick right now. So I want you to go ahead and do this little trick. What I want you to do is get some reducer and then just pour just a little bit into the mix, maybe about 10% of the whole mix. And this will help loosen it up and spray much better. So now with the reducer added, it's much more smoother. We can see the difference here. You can see how smooth and how fine the droplets are compared to the other side. If it's coming out too coarse, too rough, too ugly, add a little bit of reducer. That'll help smooth it out a little bit, flow out of the gun and break up that primer just a little bit. In this area, we'll apply the first coat. And we'll allow this to sit just about 5 minutes. The sun's beaming in on it, so it's going to flash pretty quickly. Let's jump over to our hood and apply a coat to the Bondo. The same thing over here, we'll apply it to our body fill area. The reason why is the body filler generally is going to soak up a little bit more, and you want to make sure you have enough primer so your transition between body filler and the rest of the panel is completely smooth. And we'll leave it just like that. We'll allow it to flash. Let's hop back over to our fender and give it a full coat. Now, one of the biggest reasons why you want a smooth primer job, and a lot of guys might not think it's the most important thing in the world, is basically because that is going to be the finish that you have to sand in order to get a smooth base coat, clear coat finish. So if you have a primer gun that's not laying it on really smooth, that's going to make more work for you. You're going to be removing more product, more protection than you would want to, trying to get that finish smooth. So the smoother the primer, the better, because you're not going to have to work through the grits as much. You might be able to start off with a 320 and then finish with a 400 instead of trying to really knock it down a lot with maybe a lesser grit 220. You really don't want to mess with 220 on a primer just like this. You would probably want to start at no lower than a 320. So let's knock down another coat here. We'll give you some more tips along the way. And at this point, we'll start at the top and we'll move all the way to the bottom. We're going to treat it like a normal panel for around 75% overlap for primer. You can see here we missed a little bit of body work, but let's come back to this at the end of the video and I'm going to show you what we're going to do for that. We'll now apply our first real coat. Need a little bit more pressure and open up that fluid just a little bit to get that nice and flat. It might look a little bit stripy, but don't worry. As long as the material is getting to the panel, that's all that matters when it comes down to primer. Now we're here with the second full coat. Now if you're finding that your primer really just isn't coming out smooth, just scratch that whole mix, and remember how it's 4 to 1 to 1. Well, I want you to take that last one and I want you to reduce that with reducer. Okay, so sometimes in different climates it might lay out smoother. It's very hot here, it's around 95 degrees almost, so that paint is not going to want to come out smoother. So that's why we wanted a little bit of reducer to really help it out. So it really depends on the primer, it depends on the temperature and different variations. We know the fluid tip, we could go a little bit bigger up to 2.0, but I like a 1.8 because it atomizes the primer just the way I want. So let's proceed with that final coat. And then our final coat here on the hood. We'll go on a little bit wetter, a little bit tighter. This will be the final primer on this actual hood. We really had to work the hood a lot in order for it to come out smooth. A lot of chips, some scratches, minor areas in the fiberglass or SMC that needed adjustments, but I'm really happy with the way it's looking. Now something like this, if it has a lot of body work on SMC or fiberglass, it's not a bad idea to use a polyester primer as well. That is a good candidate for this type of product. I don't always recommend using the polyester, but it does have its place, and it's usually with these older vehicles, really helps to get a nice straight flat finish. And if we had a little bit more work to do on this hood, we might have been using it. And as we can see here, it's got a beautiful 2 coats of urethane primer on the whole entire panel, as well as a little bit extra on the body filler. Now, I'm gonna allow this to really dry 24 hours before I even touch it with the sander. And that will be in another video, how to prepare your primer for paint. So make sure you pay attention to all the Paint Society's videos so you don't miss any key instructions on how to paint your car, whether it's in your garage or even in the shop. Now I told you earlier we missed this little chip here, so we're gonna try to go ahead and we took our little piece of tape and we're gonna get a little bit of primer on the tip of this piece of tape here, and we're gonna see if we can just gently dab a little bit in there so that we don't have to come back here and put some filler and all that into it. So it might not look too pretty, but all we really care about is the fill. If it does start to run on you a little bit, trust me, with this Florida sun, it's going to bake it nice and neat. And now we won't have to worry about putting body filler and repriming it because this is catalyzed primer. It will dry, and then we'll just go ahead and sand that down. And after your primer coat, you have to clean your gun out so it sprays well. Now, the one thing I do like about the 3M Performance gun, it's so easy to clean. I ended up actually buying 2 more. I got a total of 4. Originally 3M says, hey, try out these spray guns. The first batch of spray guns, the AccuSpray, didn't work really well, but the 3M Performance gun, I think they nailed it, and I ended up just purchasing a couple more on my own. It just makes things a lot easier, saves on material. So here we have it. This cup right here in liner, yep, that is your paint cup that you don't have to clean out. So this gets reused. This is a hard cup, so you don't need to really clean that out. And then all you've got to do here is, I like to take like a paper towel. So I'll take a paper towel first, and I like to clean the inside. I'll clean it out, get it decently clean. I'll take the fluid tip, everything's built in together, the air cap, I guess you could say. And all you got to really do is take a little bit of lacquer thinner and clean it out in here. And you can even let this soak just for a little bit if you want. And this is really your only cleaning when it comes to this spray gun, actually. That's why I think it's so much more beneficial than having to clean out a whole primer cup. And guys, if you don't clean out your spray guns, they will not perform well. Can't stress that enough. Clean out your spray guns each and every time so that you have a nice starting point for your paint. There's so many factors that can go bad or wrong when it comes to spraying. At least control the ones that you can. All right, so that's just about gonna do it. That's clean. You take the fluid tip here, you give a little bit of a wipe, comes right off. If you just went ahead and cleaned it after the primer, you'll put it back on and it's good to go. Now these are good for about a good 30, 40 uses. A lot of guys will say, well, that's expensive. I actually feel like you get a little bit more out of it, to be honest, but no complaints here. You save on lacquer thinner and paper towels and just generally cleaning in general. So nice little gun for primer, base coat, clear coat, whatever you might need. Well, that's going to wrap things up for this episode. I hope you learned a lot about the Urethane Surfacer Primer. And remember, it still can be used on metal just as long as there's an epoxy underneath or some sort of protection, etch, or whatever it might have been on the surface. You can use this urethane on plastic, SMC, just about anything, but it's got to have the right preparation underneath it and the right components already on the surface, whether that's plastic or whether that's metal or whatever your project entails. Guys, this is Brian from Paint Society reminding you, don't overthink it. It's just paint. I'll see you guys on the next episode.